What would you do if a quiet stranger showed up at your door during a stormy night? No past, no name, just eyes full of fear, and a request to stay until morning. For one small-town mechanic, that single act of kindness would change everything. Before we begin, if stories of hope, redemption, and unexpected human connection move you, consider subscribing to the channel. We'd love to have you with us for every heartfelt journey ahead. Now, let's begin. Poor mechanic took in a quiet girl for the night. She vanished by dawn, leaving a diamond pendant. The rain came down hard, slapping against the corrugated roof of Jake Miller's garage like 1,000 tiny fists. Thunder growled over the Colorado mountains, echoing down the empty streets of Ridgway, a town most folks had already forgotten. Jake stood beneath the flickering overhead light, wiping grease from his calloused hands, the rich scent of oil and rust still lingering in the air. He was just about to shut the rolling door when something caught his eye through the curtain of rain, a figure barely visible standing under the metal awning outside. At first, he thought it was a trick of the lightning. But then came the shape again, a young woman, drenched, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, face obscured by wet hair clinging to her cheeks. No umbrella, no suitcase, just a thin coat plastered to her body like she'd been walking for hours. Jake hesitated. He wasn't in the habit of letting strangers into his life. Not anymore. Not since everything fell apart, the job, the marriage, the sense of trust he used to give too freely. But she looked terrified. He walked to the door and unlocked it slowly, his voice steady but cautious. "You lost." She looked up at him, eyes sharp, glassy with rain and something deeper. Fear. Exhaustion. "I just need somewhere dry." "Just tonight," she said quietly. Her voice was almost a whisper, but it didn't tremble. There was resolve behind it, as if she'd made the decision only after weighing every alternative. Jake glanced out at the storm behind her. Wind howled against the metal siding. Trees swayed like they might snap. He sighed. "I got a couch. It ain't much, but it's warm. Come in." She didn't thank him. She just stepped past him like she'd used the last of her strength to ask and had nothing left to spare. The inside of the garage office was modest, old leather couch, a small heater, a coffee pot that hadn't seen fresh beans in days. Jake handed her a threadbare towel, unsure if he should ask her name or pretend none of this was happening. She dried her hair silently, sitting on the edge of the couch like someone who expected to be kicked out at any moment. He poured her a cup of instant coffee. "It's terrible," he said, setting it on the crate beside her. "But it's hot." She reached for the cup with hands that trembled. Not from cold, Jake realized, but from something else. "You got a name?" he asked, sitting in the chair opposite her. She paused. "Lena," she said, then added, "Just Lena." He nodded, accepting it at face value. They sat in silence. Outside, thunder cracked again. A tree branch scraped the side of the building like fingernails on steel. "You running from something?" he asked gently, eyes not judging, just observing. Lena looked down at her soaked shoes. "Does it matter?" Jake leaned back, crossed his arms. "Not to me. Just figured. Someone like you doesn't end up at a mechanic's garage in the middle of nowhere unless she's got a good reason." She didn't respond. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter around her and leaned into the armrest of the couch. "I won't cause trouble," she murmured. "I believe you." Jake turned off the overhead light, leaving just the soft glow of the desk lamp in the corner. She was already asleep or close to it, face turned away from him, chest rising in slow, steady breaths. For the first time all week, the silence didn't feel heavy. He watched her for a moment longer, then stepped quietly into the back room and closed the door. By morning, the rain had stopped. Jake rubbed sleep from his eyes and stepped into the main garage, still expecting to see Lena curled on the couch. But the couch was empty. The blanket was folded neatly. The coffee cup rinsed and placed upside down on the crate. Jake's gut tightened. He stepped outside, scanning the street empty. No sign of her. He checked the door. still locked from the inside. Then he saw it. On the workbench next to a coil of wiring and an old carburetor was a small velvet pouch. Jake picked it up slowly, almost reverently, as if it might vanish in his hands. Inside was a necklace. Not costume jewelry, not something you'd find at the local pawn shop. This was something else entirely, platinum chain tear-shaped diamond pendant glinting even in the gray morning light. It looked like it cost more than the entire building he was standing in. Jake stared at it, a creeping unease curling up his spine. Why would she leave something like this? Who was she? He stepped back, instinctively scanning the shop as if expecting someone to jump out and say it was all a prank. But the silence was heavier now. Not peaceful like the night before, oppressive, foreboding. He tucked the necklace into his work shirt pocket, heart thudding against his ribs. Something was wrong. And, for the first time in years, Jake Miller felt like he was part of something far bigger than the boundaries of his quiet, broken life. She'd come in from the rain like a ghost and vanished just as silently. But ghosts didn't leave behind diamonds. Jake stood motionless, the velvet pouch still in his hand, its weight far heavier than a single necklace could explain. He ran a thumb over the soft fabric, then over the diamond flawless cool to the touch utterly out of place in his rough world of engine grease and broken carburetors. His breath fogged faintly in the chilly morning air, leaking in through the thin insulation. He'd woken expecting to brew a pot of bad coffee, rotate tires for a neighbor's beat-up Subaru, and maybe fix the busted heater in his pickup. Not to be standing here heart-pounding, holding something that didn't belong in Ridgeway or in his life. He sat down slowly on the edge of the couch where Lena had slept just hours ago. The cushion still held a faint warmth. A single long strand of dark hair clung to the fabric. Jake's fingers hovered near it, then retreated. It felt too personal, too sacred to disturb. Why did she leave this behind? Jake wasn't naive. He knew enough about the world to recognize two possibilities: either Lena had left the necklace by mistake, or she had left it on purpose. But if it was an accident, why fold the blanket so carefully? Why rinse the cup? Why vanish? His instincts whispered something deeper. She had planned it. Every movement, every word, even the way she gave him just her first name. There was pain behind her eyes. Yes, but there was calculation too. Like a person who'd rehearsed the escape 1,000 times in her head and had finally executed it with the precision of a whisper. He reached for his phone and opened a browser. The slow internet connection crawled as he typed diamond necklace teardrop platinum, half expecting nothing. But the moment the search completed, his stomach tightened. There it was. Not an exact match, but close enough to make his skin crawl. Hanover Collection. Limited series, 12. Pieces only, not for public sale. His fingers froze. Hanover. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling as if the answer might be scrawled across the rafters. The name scratched at something buried deep in his memory, business news maybe, or a magazine at the diner. Hanover, a corporation, big, financial, ruthless. Not the kind of name that floated casually into towns like Ridgeway. He clicked the link. The site required authentication investor, login only. Jake tossed the phone onto the workbench and stood, his boots echoing sharply on the concrete floor. He paced, restlessly scanning the room for something he didn't yet know he was looking for. The folded blanket. The coffee cup. And then, on the desk, something barely noticeable beneath a corner of the lamp's base. A scrap of paper. Jake moved the lamp and freed it, carefully unfolding it with rough fingers. It wasn't a letter, not even a full sentence. Just a few scribbled words, smudged at the edges like they'd been written with a wet pen or trembling hand. Don't trust anyone from Hanover. The handwriting was neat but rushed, and the ink had bled into the page like tears. Jake stared at the note, then reread it twice. Something sharp and quiet twisted in his chest. He didn't know Lena. Not really. But she hadn't struck him as a liar or a thief. He could have called the sheriff. Should have, maybe. But instinct told him otherwise. The law didn't always protect the right people. He knew that too well. Years ago he'd trusted the system, and it had chewed him up like rusted gears. Lost his engineering license, lost his reputation, lost the woman who once called him the most honest man she knew. No. This time he wouldn't assume guilt, not without answers. A knock came at the garage door, 3 short raps firm. Jake's body tensed. That was fast. He tucked the necklace and the note into the pocket of his flannel shirt and walked to the door, peeking through the side window. A black SUV. A man in a sharp charcoal suit stepped out and stood beneath the awning. Clean shave, black gloves, sunglasses. Though the morning was cloudy, Jake opened the door a few inches enough to speak through. "Morning," he said flatly. "Mr. Miller." The man's voice was smooth corporate, like someone who had never had to raise it to be heard. "Who's asking? I'm with Hanover Private Holdings. We're conducting a confidential recovery operation. A young woman may have passed through this area last night, traveling alone, distressed. We believe she may have stolen something of significant value." Jake raised an eyebrow. "We talking about a car? I run a garage." The man didn't smile. Something far more valuable than that. Jake let the silence hang, watching the man's expression for any sign of humanity. There was none. Just the faint cold gleam of someone paid well to not ask questions. "She's dangerous," the man added. "Our concern is for public safety. If you've seen her, we ask you to inform us directly, not law enforcement." That was a mistake. Too confident, too controlled. Jake nodded slowly, the picture forming now. "Can't say I've seen anyone," he said. The man's jaw twitched almost imperceptibly. "If you remember anything, time matters." He handed Jake a card. No title, just a name and number, R. Denning Hanover Security Division. Jake watched the SUV drive off, tires hissing on wet asphalt. He closed the door and locked it behind him. Then he walked back to the couch, sat down hard, and stared at the paper in his hand again. Don't trust anyone from Hanover. His instincts had been right. She hadn't just run from a storm. She was running from something else entirely. And somehow now he was part of it. Jake didn't sleep that night. Not really. He laid on the cot in the back of the garage, staring at the ceiling, the neon glow of the security light outside, slicing a pale blue line across the concrete floor. Every creak in the old building made his muscles tense. Every gust of wind against the siding sounded like footsteps. He hadn't felt this way in years, like someone had turned the world upside down, and he was the only one who hadn't gotten the memo. That man, Denning, wasn't just a corporate suit. There was something in his voice, something clinical, like he'd been trained to talk without giving away anything at all. Jake had worked with men like that during his short-lived consulting days in Denver, the kind who smiled without meaning it, who knew how to wrap threats in silk. And now one had shown up at his door. He rose before dawn and made strong coffee, then pulled out the pouch again. The necklace glinted in the weak light, perfect and still, a symbol of everything Lena had left unsaid. He laid out the scrap of paper next to it. Her warning. Don't trust anyone from Hanover. His thumb brushed the edge of the note. He wanted to believe she'd meant to come back, that she hadn't just disappeared to escape whatever mess she'd gotten into, but deep down he knew Lena didn't leave by accident. She planned it, and she'd left the necklace on purpose. Why? As a message, a thank you or a trap. Jake pulled open a drawer and removed a thin manila folder, the last vestige of his past life. Inside were clippings, documents, a copy of the report that had ended his career as a propulsion engineer. He flipped through it, slowly stopping at a familiar photo of himself, years younger, standing in front of a prototype jet engine. The headline read, "Engineer accused of safety breach in test incident." He hadn't talked about it in 5 years, not even with Sandra. But now it loomed again, the reminder that truth didn't always win. And those with power, they didn't like being exposed. So when Lena warned him don't trust them, he listened. By late morning, he was back under a car trying to keep his mind quiet. A neighbor's old Ford was making a rattle in the suspension. It was comforting in a way, the clank of metal, the familiar feel of tools in his hand, the knowledge that some problems had solutions you could hold in your fingers. But he wasn't under that car for 5 minutes before he saw the black SUV again. It rolled past the garage, slow like a shark circling. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out onto the pavement, arms crossed. The SUV stopped at the corner, paused, then moved on. He watched it disappear down the road, heart sinking. They were watching, waiting, probably hoping he'd slip up. A light knock pulled him back inside. The garage door squealed as it opened, and Sandra walked in holding 2 paper bags. "You forget breakfast again," she said, tossing one onto the desk. "You've got that face." "What face?" "The one you used to wear when your old boss gave you a lecture in front of 30 people. Jake gave her a half-smile, the most he could manage. "It's been a strange couple of days." Sandra sat in the old chair across from him, peeling back the foil on a breakfast burrito. "Well, if you don't want to talk about it, I'll just assume it involves a woman and something on fire." Jake hesitated. "Then she showed up here 2 nights ago. Soaked, silent, scared. Gave me just her first name and asked for a couch." Sandra didn't flinch. "And she vanished by dawn. Left behind a diamond necklace worth more than this whole garage and a note telling me not to trust a massive corporation." Sandra leaned forward slowly. "Hanover." Jake blinked. "You know them?" "Oh, honey," she said, setting her burrito down. Back in the 80s, they were just a rising investment firm. Now they own half the county. Oil rights water deals even tried to buy the post office 5 years ago. Jake raised an eyebrow. The post office. They wanted to privatize mail delivery in 3 towns. Said it would be more efficient. I told them where to shove it. He almost laughed. Almost. "She's in trouble, Sandra. Serious trouble." Sandra's expression softened. "And you believe her?" He nodded slowly. "I don't know why. I just do." "That's enough," she said. "Sometimes your gut knows things your mind hasn't figured out yet." Jake ran a hand through his hair. "She could be anywhere now. And I've got a corporate bloodhound circling the shop." Sandra reached into her purse and pulled out a stack of mail. "Then maybe it's time you followed her trail before they do." He frowned. "What is that, receipts?" she said, flipping through them. "From the corner store. Gas stations. There's a charge from the Mountain View Market time-stamped the night she was here. Paid in cash, but the clerk remembers her. Said she bought tea. The expensive kind." Jake's eyes widened. "You asked about her. I know how to ask without asking Jake." He stared at the slip she handed him, time date total. It was her. Definitely her. "There's only one place in a 50-mile radius that sells that brand," Sandra continued. "Aspen Organics. Rich people tea." Jake exhaled tension curling in his shoulders. "She's heading north." Sandra gave him a look. "So what are you waiting for?" "Go, before they find her first." He hesitated, then folded the receipt, the necklace, and the note into a canvas pouch and zipped up his old army jacket. As he climbed into his beat-up truck, Sandra called after him. "You be careful, Jake. You're not just fixing cars anymore." He nodded once the engine rumbling to life beneath him. As he pulled onto the open road, he looked out over the ridgeline trees, swaying in the crisp wind clouds hanging low like a curtain waiting to rise. He wasn't sure what he was driving toward, but something deep in his chest, the same thing that once guided his hands on turbine blades and torque wrenches, told him it mattered more than anything he'd done in a long, long time. She trusted him. Now it was his turn to find her. The road to Aspen wasn't long, but it wound like a question mark across the foothills, each turn hugging the trees tight as if reluctant to let go of secrets. Jake's old truck rumbled steadily uphill, its heater groaning against the morning chill. The canvas pouch with Lena's necklace and note sat on the passenger seat, weighted by the silence between bursts of static on the radio. His fingers tapped against the wheel, restless. He hadn't driven this way in years. Not since his last project contract back when he still wore ties and shook hands with people who used his first name like they owned it. Back when he still believed that truth always won. Now, all he had was a scribbled warning, a gut feeling, and a trail of tea. He pulled off at a gas station near the edge of Aspen, a rustic outpost for skiers and lost hikers. A silver-haired man behind the counter gave him a look somewhere between polite and indifferent. Jake held up the receipt Sandra had given him. "You remember selling this tea?" The man squinted at the date. "Yesterday afternoon. Cash. Quiet girl hood up, kept her head down. Pretty eyes." She asked where the bus station was. Jake leaned in. "Bus." She said she needed to get somewhere quiet. I told her the shuttle west leaves once a day from the depot. 2 towns over. Jake's breath caught. She wasn't hiding nearby. She was moving again. "You sure she left? I'm sure she paid cash and disappeared. Could have hitched a ride, too. Didn't seem like she wanted to be found." Jake stepped outside and looked toward the distant ridgeline where the mountains bled into the sky like bruises. There were a dozen towns west of here. Mining towns. Ghost towns. Forgotten patches of road where no one asked questions and phones barely worked. He leaned on the hood of his truck and opened the pouch again, staring at the diamond necklace. It wasn't just expensive, it was unique. Too personal to be traded, too rare to go unnoticed. A symbol of wealth and class far removed from the girl who had curled up on his couch with wet hair and shaking hands. Why would someone like Lena, clearly intelligent, clearly scared, leave something like that behind? Then he noticed something new. Inside the velvet pouch's inner lining, barely visible in the stitching, was a loose thread. He tugged gently. A tiny seam gave way, revealing a sliver of plastic tucked deep inside. A micro drive. Jake's stomach turned cold. He held it up to the light. No markings. Just the faintest indent where it might slide into a reader. It wasn't just jewelry. She'd hidden something inside it. Jake's pulse quickened. He pulled out his phone and dialed the only person he trusted with this kind of thing. An hour later, he was standing in the cluttered workspace of Eli Navarro, a tech repair guy who had once been a cybersecurity consultant before the government labeled him too inquisitive. He now ran a repair booth for tourists with broken ski goggles and still owed Jake 2 favors. Eli eyed the microdrive like it was radioactive. "You know, people have been killed over things smaller than this, right?" Jake folded his arms. "Can you open it or not? I can open anything, but I don't like the look on your face. It's not my face you should worry about." Eli slid the drive into a hidden port behind a dual-screen setup. The code loaded instantly thousands of document spreadsheets and encrypted folders with names like Cypress Holdings and Asset Reallocations. Internal only. Eli's jaw dropped. "These aren't personal files. These are corporate laundering records." Jake leaned closer. "From Hanover. From multiple shell accounts." "But look," Eli pointed. "Same IP origin. Same document signature. And see this folder?" Jake read the label, MH Auth Executive Access Only. MH, Eli murmured. "That's Miles Hanover. This is top-level access. No one gets these files unless they're inside." Jake's throat dried. Lena hadn't just stumbled into trouble. She was the whistleblower. "She's not a thief," Jake said quietly. "She's trying to expose them." Eli nodded slowly. "Then she's in way more danger than you think. These people don't call lawyers. They make problems vanish." Jake stood in silence, the enormity of it sinking in. Lena hadn't asked for his help, but she trusted him enough to leave behind everything. She could have dumped that necklace anywhere, but she chose his garage, his couch, his life. He glanced down at the pouch again, this time with reverence. "She's not just hiding," he murmured. "She's trying to finish something." That night, Jake returned to Ridgeway with a plan forming in the pit of his chest. He parked behind his garage, killed the lights, and slipped inside through the side door. The moment he flipped on the breaker, he stopped cold. There, sitting in his chair, sipping a bottle of water like it was his own home, was Ray Denning. "Evening, Mr. Miller," he said smoothly. "Sorry to let myself in." Jake didn't move. "You broke in." Ray smiled like a man who'd heard the accusation before. "We're past formalities, aren't we?" Jake said nothing. Ray set the bottle down. You see, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in leverage. And I think you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you." Jake's jaw clenched. Ray leaned forward, voice dropping. "She's dangerous, Jake. She's not who you think. You think she's fragile? Misunderstood. That's what she wants you to believe." Jake stared him down. "And what do you want me to believe?" Ray stood walking slowly toward the door, then stopped and turned back. "I want you to believe that the next time I come here, I won't be alone." The door closed behind him with a click that echoed in Jake's chest like a warning shot. Jake stood in the silence, surrounded by tools and memories, watching the door he'd always trusted stay shut. Then he walked over to the bench, unzipped the pouch, and pulled out the necklace again. He didn't know where Lena was, but now more than ever he had to find her first. Not just to protect her, to stand beside her, because the truth wasn't just hers to carry anymore. It belonged to them both. The sky was a pale gray when Jake pulled onto the narrow mountain road that led toward the edge of town, where Ridgeway bled into the vast wilderness like a half-forgotten promise. His hands gripped the wheel harder than necessary. Each turn, each tree-lined stretch felt like a narrowing funnel. The microdrive now sat locked in a small metal case hidden beneath the passenger seat. He didn't need to keep looking at it anymore. The information it carried was burned into his brain. Lena wasn't just fleeing, she was fighting, and she was doing it alone. Jake couldn't let that happen anymore. Sandra had remembered a conversation from months ago, back when a strange girl had passed through the diner asking for a place with no cameras, no neighbors, and no questions. There weren't many places like that around here. But there was one. A crumbling fuel station at the edge of a decommissioned mining trail abandoned decades ago and now barely held together by rust and pine needles. He found it just past a split in the road, hidden behind a thicket of dead firs. The roof had partially caved in. A faded, closed sign dangled sideways from the front window. Jake parked the truck and stepped out slowly, scanning the area. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that hummed with tension. He approached the building, crunching gravel under his boots, and raised his hand. He didn't get a chance to knock. A click echoed through the stillness. Then her voice, low, sharp, and terrified. "Don't move." Jake froze, hands in the air, heart suddenly thudding like a jackhammer. "I'm not here to hurt you, Lena," he said gently. "It's me, Jake." From the garage, silence, then movement. A shadow shifted in the doorway. Lena stepped into view, hood up, face drawn and pale, but unmistakably her. In her trembling hands she held a small pistol, the kind that looked borrowed, not familiar. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. He kept his voice calm. "You don't have to do that. I just came to talk." Her eyes locked onto his, searching, remembering. "I shouldn't have come to you," she said hoarsely. "They'll follow you now. You don't know who you're dealing with." "I do," Jake said. "I met Denning. He's been inside my garage. He knows I have the necklace." Her jaw tightened. "Then you need to leave. I'm not leaving without you." Lena's hand wavered slightly. Her shoulders sagged under invisible weight. "They ruined my life, Jake. They framed me, stole everything, and now they want me buried so no one ever finds out what I saw. I wasn't supposed to find those files. I was just doing my job. I worked late one night and stumbled across a transfer that didn't make sense, funds bouncing between shell companies' offshore accounts. I copied them to a hidden drive just in case." She shook her head. "When I tried to report it, Miles Hanover himself called me into his office. That was the last day I ever stepped into the building. They sent lawyers, investigators, threats. I disappeared before they could disappear me." Jake took a small step forward. She didn't stop him. "I found the drive," he said. "It was hidden inside the necklace." Lena's eyes widened. "You opened it. I had help. And I saw everything. Lena, you have enough evidence to bury that company." She exhaled sharply like the air had been locked in her chest for days. "I didn't want to drag anyone else into this," she said. I just needed to get to Denver, hand the data to the right people, and vanish again. But I got sloppy. I was tired, cold, and you were kind." Jake took another step closer. "You left that necklace on purpose, didn't you?" She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "You looked like someone who'd keep something safe." I thought, if something happened to me. Jake's throat tightened. "Nothing's going to happen to you." She laughed softly, bitterly. "You still believe that I believe good people don't deserve to be hunted down like criminals," he said. "I believe that the truth still matters, even when it's dangerous." She lowered the pistol. Her hands trembled. "I don't know who I am anymore." "Jake," she whispered. "I used to be confident, calculated. Now I'm just scared, all the time." Jake stepped forward and gently took the gun from her shaking hands. She didn't resist. "You're someone who stood up when it mattered," he said. "That's more than most people ever do." Lena looked at him, then really looked. And for a moment Jake saw beneath the exhaustion, beneath the fear. There was still fire in her. Still the woman who refused to let injustice go unnoticed, no matter the cost. He helped her sit on a broken bench by the wall. She clutched a blanket around her shoulders, eyes darting occasionally to the woods outside. "They'll find me again," she said. "They always do." Jake's voice was quiet but firm. "Not this time. I know someone, a journalist, independent, off the grid. Used to work federal fraud cases. If we get him the drive and we do it right, this thing goes public before they can scrub it." Lena's gaze flickered with something unfamiliar hope. "I don't have much left, Jake. You've got the truth," he said, "and now you've got me." She smiled faintly, the first smile he'd seen from her. It didn't last long, but it was real. Jake stood and looked out the cracked window. The sun had dropped behind the mountains. Shadows stretched long across the ground. He knew time was running out, but for the first time Lena wasn't running alone. And somewhere in the distance, headlights began to crawl up the road. The low growl of tires against gravel was unmistakable. Jake stepped back from the broken window, motioning for Lena to stay low. Outside, a black SUV crept toward the abandoned fuel station, its headlights slashing through the trees like twin searchlights. The woods around them fell still, holding their breath. "It's them," Lena whispered. Jake didn't need confirmation. The rhythm of the approach, the blacked-out windows, the timing, it was Hanover's people. Denning was making his next move, and this time he hadn't come to talk. "Is there a back door?" Jake asked quickly, scanning the room. Lena nodded and pointed toward a narrow hallway lined with rotting shelves and old fuel signs. "It opens out to the trail." Jake grabbed the microdrive from his coat pocket, zipped it inside the canvas pouch, and slung it over his shoulder. He gently pulled Lena to her feet. She swayed, still weak but alert. "We go now," he said. Fast and quiet. They slipped into the hallway just as the SUV came to a halt. Jake heard car doors open 2, maybe 3 men. Heavy footsteps crunched over broken glass and leaves. Voices murmured low and clipped. "They're sweeping the place." Jake pushed the back door open with the slow precision of a mechanic easing open a rusted engine. A bitter gust of mountain air hit their faces as they stepped out into the darkness. The forest loomed like a cathedral. Tall trees arched overhead, their bare limbs clawing at the sky. "Stay close," he whispered. They moved quickly along a trail that had long since given in to disused branches whipping at their legs, stones slipping beneath their feet. Jake kept glancing back. No one behind them yet, but he knew it wouldn't take long. 10 minutes in, they reached a narrow slope. Lena stumbled, her ankle twisting awkwardly. Jake caught her, steadying her weight on his side. "We can stop if no," she gasped. "I've come too far to stop now." He nodded. She was trembling, but determined. They pressed on until the trees opened slightly into a clearing where the moonlight pooled over frozen grass. An old ranger's cabin stood to the left, half collapsed but still upright enough to offer shelter. Jake led her inside, closing the door behind them as softly as he could. Inside, the air was thick with mold and dust, but the structure held. Broken furniture littered the floor, and a fire pit sat in the center, long cold. Lena sank to the ground, exhausted. Jake dropped beside her, watching the tree line through the cracked window. The SUV hadn't followed yet, but they would. It was only a matter of time. He turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded, slowly wiping sweat from her brow. "I keep thinking, this will be over, but it just keeps going." Jake looked at her for a long moment. "Lena, you don't have to carry this alone anymore. You took the first risk. You exposed the truth. Let me take it from here." Her eyes shimmered, not from tears, but from the weight of those words. "Why are you doing this for me?" Jake's answer came without hesitation. "Because someone once let me fall when I needed help most. I swore I'd never let that happen to someone else." Lena looked away, voice barely audible. "You still believe in people?" Jake leaned back against the wall, staring at the rafters above. "I believe some people are worth believing in, and you're one of them." She didn't speak again for a while. Her body slowly relaxed, her breathing evened. Jake listened to the wind alert for any sound of pursuit. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed outside, branches snapping. Jake reached instinctively for the wrench he'd brought from the garage, heavy steel reliable. He motioned for Lena to stay silent, then peered through the split in the doorframe. A shadow moved between the trees. Too fast for an animal. He cursed under his breath. They had found them. He turned to Lena. "We need to go. Now." "No," she said, shaking her head. "We won't outrun them on foot again. They'll catch us." Jake's jaw tightened. She was right. Then he saw it, a rusted ATV parked behind the cabin, half hidden under a tarp and brush. Probably left behind by some ranger years ago. It was ancient, but Jake's eyes lit up with something he hadn't felt in years. A challenge. "Buy me 2 minutes," he said, already moving toward it. "If this thing still has a heart, I can wake it up." Lena stared at him. "You're going to fix an engine?" In the dark. In 2 minutes, Jake glanced back at her, a hint of a grin cutting through the tension. "You forget what I do for a living." He yanked the tarp off, exposing the old machine. The battery was dead, but the wiring was intact. With practiced hands, he rewired the ignition and siphoned a bit of leftover fuel from a rusty can nearby. He jerry-rigged a makeshift starter using the wrench as a bridge across the terminals. The engine sputtered, coughed, then roared to life. He didn't wait to celebrate. "Get on," Lena climbed behind him, arms tightening around his waist. Jake gunned the throttle and the ATV burst from behind the cabin just as a flashlight beam cut across the clearing. Shouts rang out. A bullet tore through a nearby tree, splintering bark inches from Jake's head. "Hang on," he shouted. They flew down the slope, the ATV rattling beneath them like a skeleton trying to outrun death. Trees whipped past. The wind howled. Lena buried her face into Jake's back as he steered through the forest like it was instinct, like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment to matter. When they finally reached the road, headlights appeared again behind them, but they were already too far ahead. Jake didn't slow until they crossed the county line. Hours later, the ATV ran dry outside a remote general store near a shut-down rail line. Jake turned off the engine and helped Lena down. They collapsed onto the cold earth, breathing hard, hearts racing. "I can't believe you did that," she said between gasps. "You actually," Jake looked at her sweat-soaked and smiling despite it all. "I told you, some things are worth fixing." And for the first time, Lena laughed. Not because it was safe, but because maybe she was finally allowed to hope. The old general store was barely more than a shadow in the night. Its sign dangled crookedly rusted nails, barely holding it aloft. The windows were boarded, but the back door creaked open with a nudge from Jake's shoulder. Inside, it was musty, cluttered with crates of canned food, a broken cooler, and stacks of yellowed newspapers no one had cared to collect. Jake laid down a few canvas tarps over a corner of the floor, and Lena sank onto them with a soft sigh, her body finally allowed to feel its exhaustion. She tucked her arms around her knees, silent. Jake knelt beside her and reached into his jacket, pulling out the canvas pouch. From it, he removed the microdrive and set it between them like a relic. "There's something I need to show you," he said gently. Lena's eyes flicked to the drive, recognition flashing in them. "You decoded it." Jake nodded. Eli helped. He's ex-Fed. Burned out, but still brilliant. He opened the drive and saw everything. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, even a folder labeled M.H. Outh. It had Miles Hanover's signature on dozens of documents tied to illegal fund transfers. Lena didn't say anything at first. Her shoulders trembled not from cold, but from the sudden release of pressure, the confirmation that she hadn't gone mad, that everything she risked her life for was real. She covered her mouth with one hand. Her eyes glassed over not from fear, but from something deeper, vindication. "I wasn't sure anymore," she whispered. "I kept thinking, maybe I imagined it. Maybe I read the numbers wrong. But it was real. I wasn't crazy." Jake's voice was low, steady. "You were never crazy. You were right, and they knew it." Lena leaned back, her head resting against a shelf of dusty soup cans. Her chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. "Do you know what it's like," she said, "to be followed by people who smile while they're ruining you? To go from boardrooms to bus stations, to be called a thief by the man you once worked late nights to impress?" Jake nodded slowly. "I do." She looked at him. "I was accused once, too. Not of theft, but negligence. I was part of an aerospace project that went wrong during a demo. A sensor failed. Prototype engine lost balance mid-test. The media blamed me before the investigation even began. The company needed a fall guy, and I was a convenient name." He exhaled, memories darkening his face. "They revoked my clearance. Fired me. That garage. It's all I had left." Lena reached out and placed a hand over his. Her touch was hesitant but warm. "I'm sorry." Jake shrugged. "Don't be. It taught me who I really was when there was nothing left to hide behind." They sat in silence for a long moment, their hands still touching, the only sound the wind brushing past the walls outside. Then Jake broke the silence. "We can't keep running. It's time to do what you came here to do." Lena met his eyes. "You mean go public?" "Yes. But not just to anyone. I know someone. A journalist. His name's Cole Travers. He used to do deep-dive financial investigations for a national paper before he started his own network. He lives off the grid now, partially because of threats, partially by choice. If anyone can get this out, it's him." Lena hesitated. "What if he doesn't believe me?" "He will," Jake said with quiet certainty. "Because I'll be standing next to you when you show him." Her expression softened, then hardened again with determination. "Okay," she said. "Then let's finish what we started." Jake stood and moved to his backpack, pulling out a cheap laptop wrapped in a towel for insulation. Eli loaded the files onto a secure cloud. "But there's one thing we couldn't open." The final folder was locked behind biometric encryption. Lena blinked. "What kind?" Jake turned the laptop toward her. "Retina scan." She leaned in, brow furrowed. "I don't remember setting that." Jake clicked open the encryption screen. "There's something else. The folder name isn't code, it's a date." He typed it out for her, 09/17/2004. Lena's eyes widened. "That's my mother's birthday," she whispered. Jake tilted his head. "You think she—" "I remember now," Lena said, her voice distant. "My father once had a necklace custom made for her, the same one I wear now. When she died, he gave it to me and said, 'There's more in this than just love.' I thought he was being poetic." Jake looked down at the diamond necklace. "May I?" She nodded, removing it gently from her neck and placing it in his palm. He turned it over, inspecting the clasp. Then he saw it, a tiny, almost invisible lens embedded near the hinge. A microscanner. He held it up to her eye. The laptop pinged softly. A loading bar appeared. Jake and Lena stared as the files decrypted one by one, audio logs, internal memos, meeting recordings, and finally a video file. Jake clicked play. The screen lit up with a recording dated just days before Lena's father died. It was Miles Hanover sitting across from him in a boardroom. The audio was clear. "You push this, and it'll be your career," Miles said. "I built this company on transparency." "Miles," her father replied, "you start funneling money to false charities, I walk." "You won't walk," Miles said coldly. "You'll vanish." The screen faded to black. Lena was shaking. Jake closed the laptop and placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. This is everything she said." Jake nodded. "It's time to call Cole." Lena took a deep breath. For the first time in months, she didn't feel hunted. She felt ready. Outside, snow began to fall. Soft, silent like a clean page waiting to be written. And this time, Lena was holding the pen. The snow fell heavier, now quieting the world like a blanket drawn gently across a tired body. Jake's truck creaked down the narrow access road toward the rendezvous point, an old ranger station on the fringe of a forgotten state park, chosen not for convenience, but for seclusion. Beside him, Lena sat in silence, her eyes fixed on the dark horizon ahead, her fingers absently tracing the edge of the now decrypted necklace. She was no longer just the woman who had shown up soaked and silent at his garage. She was a woman on the edge of reclaiming her identity. "You okay?" Jake asked softly, keeping his eyes on the road. Lena nodded, then hesitated. "Do you know what it feels like to stop running and realize you don't remember who you were before Jake didn't answer right away?" He knew the question wasn't rhetorical. "Yeah," he finally said. "I used to think I was a builder, someone who made things run. But after I lost everything, I stopped creating and just survived. I became the guy who fixes other people's damage instead of building something of my own." Lena glanced at him. And now, he smiled faintly. "Now, I think I'm helping build something again. This time, it matters more." They reached the station just past midnight. A faint glow came from inside. Cole Travers was already there. Jake parked the truck behind a wall of snow-laden trees and looked at Lena one last time before they stepped out. "You ready?" he asked. She took a deep breath. "I think I was born ready for this. I just forgot." The ranger station was rustic but warm, its stone fireplace crackling with heat. Cole stood from a desk littered with recording equipment, flash drives, and 3 battered laptops. He looked exactly as Jake remembered, scruffy beard, thick-rimmed glasses, a worn denim jacket with too many pockets. "You must be Lena Cole," said, extending a hand. "Or, should I say—" Lena Hanover. Her shoulders stiffened. Jake stepped slightly in front of her. "She trusted you, Cole. Don't make her regret it." Cole held up both hands in mock surrender. "Understood. Let's just say I've been following this web for years. I didn't know it was going to knock on my door wearing a necklace." They sat down together as Cole opened the decrypted files. Lena handed him the drive. Her fingers were steady now. Every tremor, every trace of doubt had been replaced by something quieter but stronger. Resolve. "This folder here," she said, pointing to the laptop screen, "contains asset movement records, front corporations, and 3 years' worth of internal audit manipulation." Cole clicked through the documents, his eyes sharp with focus. "This is enough to trigger a federal investigation. If we get this in the right hands, Miles Hanover will have nowhere to hide." "He never thought I'd be the one to bring him down," Lena said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes burned. Cole leaned back in his chair. The daughter of the founder disguised as a junior analyst returning undercover, vanishing when the threats began. That's the kind of truth people feel in their bones. If we get this story out right, we don't just expose a corrupt CEO. We show that justice doesn't always wear a badge or carry a gavel. Sometimes it wears a torn coat and walks through a storm. Lena swallowed hard. "I don't want to be a symbol. I just want to be free." "You will be," Jake said, reaching over to gently squeeze her hand. "We'll get you there." Cole stood and began connecting a secure satellite uplink. "Once I transmit this, it'll be out of their reach." Multiple journalists will receive copies, legal teams regulators. Hanover can't silence everyone. Lena nodded. Do it. As the files began to transfer, a sudden tremor passed through her. Not of fear, but release. The weight she'd carried for so long alone in the shadows was finally lifting. She leaned her head against Jake's shoulder. I spent so long trying to be invisible, she said softly. Now I'm about to be more visible than I've ever been. Jake turned to her. You don't have to do it alone. You never did. She smiled, not the faint broken smile of someone holding back tears, but a full genuine expression of something rare and hard-earned. Peace. The upload finished in less than an hour. Cole encrypted multiple backups and burned 2 hard copies. One he handed to Lena. You're the only one I trust to carry this, he said. Keep it safe. Jake stepped outside to check the perimeter. The snow had softened the air into stillness. No headlights, no SUV tracks, no denning. Not tonight. Inside, Lena stood by the fire watching the flames dance. Cole moved to pack up his equipment but paused and turned to her. You know he said you could vanish again if you wanted to. The story will be enough. You don't have to go public. Lena looked at him, eyes clear. No, she said. I'm going to speak. Cole blinked. You sure? For years they tried to erase my father's name. Tried to turn the company he built into a pipeline of greed. But I remember who he was, what he believed in. And I know now I am still his daughter. Jake returned in time to hear those words. He walked over quiet and steady and took her hand. You're more than his daughter, he said. You're you, and that's enough to shake the world. Outside, the wind shifted. Morning wasn't far. Back at the truck, Lena paused before climbing in. She turned to look at Jake, eyes lit with something he hadn't seen since she arrived in his life. Not fear, not exhaustion, but something freer, something that looked a lot like home. When this is over, she said, I want to find out what life feels like when I'm not running. Jake smiled. I'll be right there with you. They drove away from the ranger station together, the snow behind them marked by fresh tracks not of escape, but of emergence. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something honest, something powerful, and something worth staying for. The sun rose slowly over Ridgeway, casting gold over the snow-covered hills as if the entire world had been paused and painted in forgiveness. Jake stood alone in his garage, the same oil-stained floor beneath his boots, the same scent of steel and grease in the air. But everything felt different now, like the stillness had weight meaning. The garage was open for business, but there were no customers that morning. He hadn't slept much, not after the night they had just lived through. Lena was safe for now. Cole had taken her to a secure location outside Boulder to prepare for the broadcast, the one that would finally pull the curtain back on Miles Hanover and the empire he'd corrupted. They agreed it was better if Jake wasn't there for the press conference. Less attention, less exposure, but Jake didn't need to be in the room. He would see it all soon enough. He turned on the small TV mounted in the corner of the garage, the one that usually played daytime repair shows or old westerns. Now it was tuned to national news. The anchor's voice came in steady and serious. Developing story involving one of the country's most powerful investment firms. Today, whistleblower Lena Hanover, daughter of the late founder Edward Hanover, is coming forward with evidence of massive fraud, embezzlement, and cover-ups within Hanover Private Holdings. Jake froze as the screen shifted to a podium where Lena stood beneath a row of microphones. She was dressed simply black coat hair tied back, no makeup, no theatrics. Her voice, when she began, was quiet but firm. I never intended to be a symbol. I never asked to be at the center of this. I only wanted to do the job I was hired for and honor the values my father built this company on: integrity, fairness, transparency. But when I found evidence that these values had been compromised, I did what I thought anyone with a conscience would do. I tried to report it. Instead, I was threatened, followed, erased. I was told to disappear, but I chose to speak. Jake felt his throat tighten. She wasn't the girl who had knocked on his garage door anymore. She was something more now, someone the world couldn't ignore. The broadcast cut to snippets of the evidence-forged financial statements transfers to offshore accounts, audio recordings of boardroom threats. Everything Jake had seen. Everything they'd risked their lives to protect. The room suddenly felt too small for the weight of it all. Jake sank into his work chair, eyes never leaving the screen. Lena continued, her voice steady. "I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for people who believed in the truth more than their safety. One of them is a man you've never met. He's not a lawyer or a politician. He's a mechanic. A man who gave a stranger shelter on a stormy night because it was the right thing to do. When the world turned its back on me, he didn't. This isn't just my story, it's his too, and it belongs to everyone who's ever been told they don't matter. You do. We all do." Jake's chest ached. He hadn't expected her to say his name. She didn't. But every word was a thank you written directly into his ribs. A tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. He didn't wipe it away. Later that afternoon, Sandra arrived with 2 cups of coffee and a look that said she'd watched every second of the broadcast, too. "You always knew how to pick 'em," she said, setting a cup beside him. Jake chuckled. "I didn't pick her. She just showed up." Sandra studied him for a moment, then softened. "She didn't just show up. People like her don't end up in places like this by accident. You were meant to find each other." Jake didn't argue. Deep down, he felt it too. "Think she's safe now?" he asked quietly. Sandra nodded. "As safe as truth can make a person. Which isn't perfect, but it's something." Jake took a long sip of coffee and let the warmth settle into his chest. "She asked me once if I still believed in people," he said. "I didn't have an answer then, but I do now." And Sandra asked. "I believe in her." That evening, Jake returned to the workbench. His tools were still where he left them. But now, resting beside the socket wrenches and pliers, was the velvet pouch Lena had left behind. He opened it slowly, expecting the necklace to be inside. It wasn't. Instead, there was a note. "Jake, you were the first place that felt safe after a long time of running. You didn't ask who I was. You just cared that I was cold. There's a kind of goodness in you that doesn't need headlines to matter. But I wanted you to know none of this would have happened without you. When all this is over, I hope to come back not to hide, but to stay." Lena Jake closed the pouch, his hands trembling slightly. Outside, the wind had quieted. The snow had stopped. The world was still. And in that stillness, Jake realized something he hadn't felt in years, something he didn't dare name too soon. Hope. The snow had melted into puddles by the time Lena returned. It had been 10 days since the broadcast, a whirlwind of headlines, congressional statements, subpoenas. The Hanover name was no longer synonymous with corporate dominance, but with fraud, deception, and betrayal. Miles Hanover had resigned under pressure just 48 hours after Lena's testimony. His face now lived on the news, not on magazine covers, and the empire he'd manipulated for years had begun to crumble under the weight of her courage. Jake had watched it all unfold from the garage, never saying much. He didn't need to. He already knew what mattered. Still, when the bell above the shop door jingled late that afternoon and she stepped inside it, took everything in him not to freeze. She looked different, but not in the way people change with fame. She looked rested. Her posture no longer curled in defense. Her eyes, though still touched by a cautious shadow, no longer darted like prey. She carried herself like someone who had been unburdened. But she smiled the same way. Soft. Real. Like she remembered. Jake stood from his workbench, heart thudding. He wiped his hands on a rag, suddenly unsure of what to say. He'd imagined this moment so many times in dreams, in thoughts he tried to shake off. But reality was better than all of them. "Hey," he said finally. "Hey," she echoed. Silence stretched between them for half a breath. Then Lena stepped closer, eyes scanning the room like a memory coming home. "I didn't know if I should," she said quietly, "but I wanted to." Jake tilted his head. "Come back." She nodded. "Not because I needed to hide, not anymore, but because there's something here I don't want to run from." His chest tightened. She glanced down at the grease-stained floor, then back up at him. "Everything's moving so fast out there. Reporters, lawyers, interviews. I said no to most of it." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because all the noise felt like them. And you were the only quiet I ever trusted." He took a slow step toward her. "So what?" Now she smiled again, fuller this time. "Now I get to choose. For the first time in a long time, I get to decide who I am." Jake watched her, marveling at the strength in her stillness. "And who's that?" he asked gently. She looked around the garage, eyes lingering on the couch she once slept on, the coffee pot that hadn't improved since she left, and the velvet pouch that still sat on the shelf. Then she met his gaze, unblinking. "I'm not the girl in the storm anymore. I'm the woman who walked through it and came back." Jake felt the weight of her words settle deep in his bones. Then, without thinking, he reached into the drawer beside him and pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, polished and simple, was a key. For what, she asked, surprised. He stepped forward, pressing the key into her palm. "The side door. In case you ever want to come in before I open up." She looked down at it, stunned into silence. Her fingers curled around the key like it was something far more precious. He hesitated, then added softly, "You don't have to decide anything today. You can stay for a coffee, or a week, or forever. Up to you." Lena blinked rapidly, then laughed, a short, breathless sound that broke something open inside him. She closed the distance and reached up to cup his face with one hand, her thumb brushing lightly over the stubble on his cheek. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Then, like it had been waiting for permission, the world went quiet. No headlines, no deadlines. Just the two of them standing in the place where everything had begun, but nothing had ended. That evening, the garage closed early. Jake made grilled cheese on a hot plate while Lena sat cross-legged on the old couch, flipping through a dog-eared manual on carburetors, half laughing at his margin notes. The radio played low in the background, an old love song neither of them had heard in years. Outside, the town buzzed with news of justice and takedowns. But inside, two people who'd once been strangers shared a sandwich in silence like it was the most sacred thing on earth. "You think they'll ever forget?" Lena asked suddenly. Jake leaned back in his chair. "The world, maybe. Eventually." She looked at him, hopeful. "And you?" He met her eyes. "Never." Later, long after the dishes had been rinsed and the coffee brewed just right, Lena stepped out into the night air. Jake joined her hands in his jacket pockets, breath curling in the cold. The stars were sharp above them. The same stars she'd looked up at alone once. The same ones he used to talk to when no one else was around. Now they shared them. "I used to think people like us didn't get happy endings," she said softly. Jake looked over at her. "That's because no one ever stayed long enough to see what came after the storm." She slipped her hand into his warm and steady. "I'm staying," she said. And this time, she meant it. Spring came to Ridgeway like an apology, slow, tender, and unassuming. Snow melted in quiet trickles down the gutters, and wildflowers began to push through the frost-bitten ground with a stubborn grace. The town, always small and slow, now stirred with a curiosity it hadn't known in years. People still came by to ask if the stories were true. If Lena Hanover, the woman who toppled a corporate empire, had really stayed in this little town. If she had really been found in a mechanic's garage and not in some high-rise with glass walls and marble floors. Jake never gave them much. A smile, a nod, maybe a polite, "She's doing just fine," because she was. Lena had rented the small apartment above the bakery on Main Street, just 3 blocks from the garage. But more often than not, she could be found in the garage elbows, deep in repair manuals, sorting inventory, learning the difference between brake fluid and transmission oil. The town had adjusted quickly. They stopped seeing her as a headline and began seeing her as she truly was, the kind of woman who waved to school buses, who brought coffee to the postman, who helped Miss Avery carry her groceries when the arthritis flared up. They even started calling her the quiet girl who stayed. Jake didn't mind sharing the garage. Truth was, she'd made it better. She painted the office a soft green, installed new lighting, organized the tools alphabetically, something Jake never realized he'd needed until he didn't have to dig for a torque wrench anymore. But more than that, she brought something into the space that tools couldn't fix and shelves couldn't hold. She brought presence, steadiness, healing. One Saturday morning, as the town prepared for its annual Ridgeway Spring Market, Lena stood behind the counter reviewing receipts from the week. She wore a faded flannel over a soft gray t-shirt, and her hair was pulled into a loose braid. Jake was in the back working on a Jeep with a rusted axle, humming to a song only he seemed to know. "Got another one," she called. Jake leaned out from the garage bay. Brake job, flat tire, and an odd rattle in second gear. Mr. Callahan's Buick. Jake nodded. "Tell him I'll have it ready by Thursday." Lena scribbled it on the job board. She turned just as Sandra stepped into the shop carrying a tin of her famous cinnamon rolls. "Peace offering," Sandra said, setting them down. Jake smirked. "We didn't argue. I didn't say it was your piece I was offering." Sandra replied, giving Lena a wink. "Figured you two could use a little sweetness." Lena chuckled. "Thank you. We've been running on gas station coffee and stubbornness." Sandra looked around the garage. "Place feels different now. Lighter." "It is," Lena said softly. Jake made it feel like home. "I'm just keeping it warm." Sandra smiled, but her voice turned gentle. "You didn't just warm it, sweetheart. You brought it back to life." She left with a hug and a wave, and the scent of cinnamon lingered like a blessing. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the hills and cast long golden shadows across the street, Jake finished locking up. Lena leaned against the truck, watching the sky turn lavender and rose. "You ever think," she said, "how strange it is that everything started with one rainy night?" Jake stepped beside her. "I think about it every day." She looked at him, her voice quiet. "You didn't know who I was. You didn't owe me anything. And still, you opened the door." Jake met her gaze. "You were scared, cold, tired. You didn't need to be someone. You just needed someone to care." Lena nodded, a soft smile forming. "There's something else I've been thinking about," she said. "This garage." He raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "We should make it something more," she said. Eyes bright. "A program. For people starting over. Second chances. Teach them skills, let them work here. Mechanics, bookkeeping, customer service. Call it, I don't know." Jake looked toward the faded sign above the shop door, then back at her. "How about Miller and Hanover Garage?" he said. She laughed, light and full. "You're really putting my name on the building?" Jake shrugged. "It's already written on everything else that matters." They stood there a long while, watching the last light disappear behind the ridgeline. Hand in hand, the air between them filled not with silence, but with ease. Months later, a new sign hung proudly above the garage, Miller and Hanover Garage, honest work, honest people. And below that, in smaller script, a place for second chances. Inside, an 18-year-old named Caleb was learning how to rotate tires while Lena showed a young mother named Jessa how to create an invoice using the new software. Jake stood at the bay door, coffee in hand, watching it all unfold. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't famous. But it was real. It was healing. It was hope. And for the first time in a long, long time, Jake Miller didn't feel like the man left behind. He felt like the man who'd stayed for the right reasons and the right person. As Lena walked toward him, her eyes full of light and steady joy, he smiled. Not because the past was gone, but because the future was finally theirs to build. Together. And under that humble roof of steel and sawdust, they did. We'd love to know where you watching from. Drop your location in the comments below so we can see how far this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this heartfelt journey, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories just like this one. Your support means the world to us and helps keep these stories alive. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, stay kind, stay hopeful, and take care.